Ever wondered what it would look like if the Gojo versus Sukuna fight came to life entirely on phone? Well, that's exactly what I did. I took this iconic manga and turned it into a full manga animation, using only Alight Motion, Capcut, and Ibis Paint. I pushed every app to its limits, created 14 cuts from scratch. And yes, doing all of this on phone was a massive challenge. But did I actually pull it off? This video is brought to you by Epidemic Sound, the best sound tracking platform for every creator. We'll talk more about them later in the video. Now, I needed to lock down the reference first, which is, I wanted to animate this iconic fight scene from Jujutsu Kaisen, chapter 235, but with my own cinematic touch. In this part of the manga, there are so many epic moments that instantly felt perfect for a manga animation. From Gojo's hand regeneration to Sukuna getting slammed into a building, every panel screamed action and intensity, which made me want to bring it all to life. For context, I've mostly been creating edits in Capcut, and I usually spend my time making tutorials for my Capcut community. That's why I never really got deep into Alight Motion. I only made 2 quick edits there before, and honestly, they were pretty bad. So this time, I wanted to push myself. Instead of making a regular edit, I decided to fully animate around 14 to 15 cuts from this fight. And to make it even crazier, I jumped straight into the hardest part, animation. It might sound unusual, but for me, starting with the toughest challenge means I learn faster. I was already somewhat familiar with manga-style edits, but this project was different. I had to redesign characters, animate backgrounds, and build intense sequences. So I gave myself 2 to 3 days just to get used to Alight Motion, and even though some parts still feel confusing, I've been learning while making this project. So now moving on to the storyboard. This part is really important because it decides which scenes I animate and which ones I cut. Obviously, I can't animate the whole chapter. That would take me a whole decade, so I had to pick just the right amount without making it a burden. For the first cut, I start with Gojo's half arm. That's the opener. Then, in cut 2, his hand regenerates with blue cursed energy wrapping around it. Cut 3 is Sukuna staring at Gojo, feeling nervous for the very first time. Moving on to cut 4, things get more complex. In the manga, they go into hand-to-hand combat, but instead of showing all of that, I cut straight to the moment where Gojo lands a heavy punch and sends Sukuna crashing into a building. From here, it gets even more interesting because I added my own touch, still connected to the manga, but from a different angle and perspective. In cut 5, Gojo finally punches Sukuna away. In cut 6, we see just the buildings for a second, almost like a pause before destruction. Then, in cut 7, Sukuna smashes into the building and they start collapsing. This part is totally my idea, not in the manga. For cut 8, Gojo prepares his technique, and in cut 9, the camera zooms tightly into his eye with his hair slightly moving. Then, cut 10, Sukuna staring at Gojo, realizing he's about to launch cursed technique reversal, red. In cut 11, Gojo unleashes it. Then, in cut 12, I went for a 3D shot. Sukuna and Mahoraga watching Gojo through the hole in the broken building. Cut 13 is Sukuna's shocked reaction. Finally, in cut 14, Gojo launches Hollow Purple. So now I've got 14 cuts after removing some scenes and adding a few new ones. This is where things get serious, because the flow of the scenes really matters. I just hope I didn't ruin it at this stage. So now I'll move on to the animation part. Starting with cut 1, this is already an intense shot because it's the moment Gojo literally regains his hand. To make it look clean and not messy in the final result, I had to redesign the character in Ibis Paint, separating all the body parts. For this moment, I actually divided it into 2 scenes. First with no arm, and then with the arm fully restored. The focus here was mainly on his hands and fingers, because I wanted to bring them to life with smooth movement. That meant redrawing, separating, and animating each finger individually to make it feel natural. And of course, I had to separate every body part into layers, which is a lot of work, but necessary, so everything animates seamless later in the Alight Motion. The hardest part for me was definitely the hair. Close-up shots meant I had to animate strand by strand, which is insanely time-consuming since each strand needs its own layer. I even made some extra layers for backup movements, just in case. After that, I worked on Gojo's eyes, which I only used in close-up shots when I needed eye movement. Finally, for cut 1, I reused the same project but with Gojo missing his arm. I made Gojo's hand look wounded so it feels real. I added scars and some blood, and honestly, it makes the whole design look way better. This detail also sets up the moment when Gojo regenerates his hand, because once I move into the animation process, that hand will really stand out. Now officially, after redesigning the character and preparing all the parts, I moved into Alight Motion to bring this scene to life. The first thing I did was line up all the layers in sequence. This makes animating so much easier later. Then I started with the full arm and fingers. To keep things organized, I grouped all the layers for the hand and fingers, so I could animate them without running into a mess. For each finger, I used a rectangle mask. That way, I could animate them individually with more control. I used the bend effect and kept tweaking the settings until the movement felt natural. Once the fingers were done, I moved on to animating the entire hand using keyframes. But honestly, the most boring and painful part of this shot was the hair. Since it's a close-up, I had to animate each strand carefully, and yes, one by one. The process was similar to the fingers, but instead of just bend, I also added wave warp to push the movement to another level. Again, lots of playing around with settings until it finally looked right. After that, I animated the eyes slightly, added some subtle neck movement in slow motion, and for the final touch, shadow. The shadows were a total game changer because they gave so so much depth and made the shot look next level. So here's the final animation. It looks a bit slow right now, but once I drop it into the main project, I'll speed it up to match the pace. And just like that, Gojo in this shot was animated the same way, so no need to repeat the whole process here. Cut 3 is up next, and this one's a little tricky. In the manga panel, Sukuna's hands aren't even drawn, and his lower body is barely there, which means before I can even start separating body parts, I have to redraw the missing hands and lower body myself. In this scene, Sukuna's nervous because Gojo regains his hand. To capture that tension, I'll animate his eyes. Just a small eye movement can add a lot of intensity to the moment. Later, I'll move Sukuna's hands in sync with the eyes to make the scene pop even more. But here's where it got rough. While redesigning the parts, I realized it wasn't just the hands and lower body that needed fixing. The manga panel had text placed right across the center of his body, so I had to first clean that up by filling it white color, then draw the missing hands. I didn't bother with the full palms and fingers since this shot is zoomed in. Just the hands were enough to sell it. Everything was going smoothly until Ibis Paint crashed. When I tried reopening the project, it just wouldn't load. Turned out the issue was storage being full. Working on 14 cuts on a phone is tough, so I had already prepared myself for setbacks like this. I had to redo the whole process again. And while reworking, I also remembered I forgot to make shadow layers for cut 1 and 2. I wasn't going to redo those, so I left them as they are. Once that was sorted, I moved on to animating the eyes. I separated the eyelashes and lower eye parts for smoother movement. Since this was a close-up, I also saved each strand of Sukuna's hair, so I could animate them properly later. After exporting all the body parts, I took everything into Alight Motion. From there, most of the process was similar to cuts 1 and 2. The main difference was the eye movement, shifting toward Gojo to show Sukuna's fear. I synced the eyelash and eye movements until it felt natural. To make the shot feel even more alive, I also added subtle movement to Sukuna's clothes, so the scene carries more intensity. And the eye I placed on Sukuna wasn't reused. I actually created it in Ibis Paint specifically for this shot. After putting everything together, the cut came out exactly how I wanted. Now for cut 4. Features. Gojo makes a high-speed move to punch Sukuna. To really make this scene feel intense, I had to choose the perfect sound design. Honestly, finding the right sound used to take forever until I found Epidemic Sound. Epidemic is really the best sound tracking platform for creators. High-quality music and sound effects, and no copyright worries. Now, it's part of my workflow. I just hop into their library, search for a vibe like intense or anime hits, and boom, I instantly find the perfect track or SFX. Sometimes, I even type in the name of a commercial anime song I like, and Epidemic recommends similar tracks from their catalog that I can actually use without worrying about copyright. And now, they've launched something brand new, Adapt. It's an AI-powered tool that lets you shape a track to perfectly fit your scene. You can tweak the mood, lower the intensity, or even add instruments. And the best part is, every adapted track is still made by real musicians, and the artists actually earn more when you use Adapt. That's what I love. It enhances human creativity without replacing it. You'll hear the impact clearly in today's final manga animation. The scene comes to life because of how powerful the music and sound design are. Tap the link in the description and use my code VAZE50 to get 30 days free plus 2 months at 50% off. Only the first 200 people can claim it, so don't miss out. For this cut, I wanted Gojo charging straight at Sukuna. In the manga, the angle was different, so I searched around and found a reference on Pinterest that matched the look I had in mind. The tricky part was his eye. The original wasn't looking good, so I erased it and completely redrew it, adding scars, proper eyelashes, and fixing the perspective so it wouldn't look goofy. Since this scene carries a lot of tension, getting the eye right was really important. I even drew the inner details, though I didn't need to animate the eyeball itself because the cut is super fast, less than a second long. After finishing that, I cut out all the pieces I needed and jumped into Alight Motion. Animating his hair and hands was quick and easy, nothing too complex. And with that, this cut was wrapped up. Next up is cut 5, the moment where Gojo finally lands a full power punch on Sukuna. This part isn't directly in the manga. It's my own way of connecting the sequence, but it still stays true to the original panel. Before separating the body parts for animation, I had to redraw the hair since in the manga some parts were blocked. This cut was pretty similar to cut 4, so setting it up was straightforward. The animation itself is simple, but once it's combined with the final composition and shake, that's when the impact really comes through. For the animation, I focused on moving both hands, with the punching hand moving faster and carrying more intensity. And later in composition, I'll add blue cursed energy flaming around his hands to really bring the scene to life. Cuts 6 and 7 are a bit different, just buildings, no character animation. Since most of the work here comes in composition, I'll save these for the background section later. Cut 8 is all about Gojo's eye. Since in the manga panel it's shown zoomed in, most of the work naturally had to focus there. Because this is such a close-up, I really wanted the eye to feel detailed, so I added some wounds underneath and drew veins to give it more intensity. Originally, I planned to show both eyes exactly like the manga, but later I decided to focus on just one eye instead. It felt more dramatic that way. I also added some hair strands moving across the frame to make the shot feel alive. alive. Then, in Alight Motion, I zoomed in, animated the hair, and finally brought the hair to life. That's where this cut ends. Cut 9 is where Gojo finally opens his cursed technique reversal. Out of all the cuts, this one was actually the easiest. I jumped straight into separating the body parts without needing to redraw anything. Since the shot is from a distance, I didn't bother animating each individual hair strand. It would have been a waste of time, and I needed to save time and resources for the next cuts up ahead. The only thing I drew was eye. But again, no need for detailed movement here because of how far the shot is framed. The real highlight of this cut will come later in the composition stage. That's when the scene will really hit its full momentum. Moving on to cut 10, Sukuna watching Gojo about to unleash red. The main struggle here was the body. Since the dialogue bubbles were covering half of it, I had to redraw the missing parts. And honestly, no matter how much I tried, every time I looked at it again, it just looked like shit. I kept erasing, redrawing, erasing again. It ate up a lot of time. After finally pushing through that, I moved on to Sukuna's hair. Way easier compared to the body. Once I had everything ready, I separated the parts and animated a little head movement as he looks toward Gojo. I also made his eyes shrink right at the moment he realizes Gojo's about to end his career. This cut is done, wrapped up perfectly. Cut 11 kinda works like cut 5. Gojo pauses for a moment, then unleashes red. The nice thing is, this shot didn't need a ton of extra drawings like the others. It just clicked perfectly, exactly the way I wanted. Cut 12 is where Sukuna and Maharaga are watching Gojo from the building. Since they're just standing still, shocked by what happened, this shot isn't animated. That meant my main focus here was on redesigning the characters properly. In the original panel, the scene didn't really have much detail, so I had to level it up, adding strong black line strokes, coloring the characters, and building in shadows. All of that makes them stand out and gives the shot way more weight. Now for Gojo outside the building, I didn't want to repeat the exact same process I used for Sukuna and Maharaga, so instead, I took the refined Gojo PNG from cut 9 and started experimenting. I changed his hand movement and added a new hand pose that makes it look like he just unleashed red. That little trick worked out really well. It sold the moment and also saved me a lot of time. Cut 13 is basically the same vibe as cut 12. The panel was flat, so I cleaned it up, added shadows, bold strokes, and even drew in Sukuna's cursed mark that was almost hidden. I kept tweaking it until it looked sharp. And the only animation here? The eyes. Quick, darting movement. Perfect for that shocked reaction. And when you compare the original panel with the one I redesigned, you can really see the difference. That's how important the refining process is. It completely transforms the shot. Finally, the last cut of this animation. This is the moment Gojo launches Hollow Purple and everything goes completely black. First, I had to sketch out the hair, then layer bold black strokes to make it really pop. After that, the heavy lifting came down to the composition, so I let it breathe, only adding a slow-mo flow to the hair so it blends seamlessly into the scene. The real focus here was the design. I went with deep shadows, because with Hollow Purple charging up behind him, it creates such an insane, high-energy vibe. That's what pushes this shot over the edge. And just like that, this cut wraps up the entire animation. Honestly, it felt like it took me forever, and then I still had to grind through the background, composition, and audio, which felt like another forever on top. But in the end, seeing it all come together like this, 100% worth every second. Now for the backgrounds. My plan was to reuse the same background for a few cuts just to save time. I didn't want to redraw everything for every single shot, so for cuts 2, 3, and 4, I stuck with the same background and then tweaked it in Capcut to match each scene. The idea was to create several buildings that I could reuse again and again in different cuts. But of course, this doesn't always work. Whenever the angle or perspective changes, I have to draw new buildings for that scene. At least for cuts 2, 3, and 4, reusing the background really saved me for a bit. As for the sky, I kept it simple. Just pulled a dark sky video from Pinterest, and it blended perfectly with the hand-drawn elements. For cut 5, where Gojo punches Sukuna, I had to draw out a few more buildings in the right perspective to make the scene fit. For the buildings in the distance, I reused the ones I'd already made and adjusted them into proper perspective. But for the close-up shots, I went in and drew fresh, detailed buildings so that when they appear up close, they really stand out, make the scene look cool. Now for cuts 6 and 7, these were totally different. I switched up the perspective and angle completely, and this scene doesn't even exist in the manga. It was just an idea I had in mind. Gojo punches Sukuna, he goes flying, and then crashes straight into the buildings. For cut 6, I drew out some solid buildings to set up the impact. Then for cut 7, I reused the same background, but removed the front building and drew one big destroyed building, split into 2 pieces. I reused that design several times and added keyframes to make it look like the buildings were actually collapsing. Honestly, this background came out really clean, and I know once I drop it into the full composition, this whole scene is going to stand out in a big way. Cut 9 was a little different. Instead of drawing a bunch of new buildings, I just used some pre-made ones. The reason's simple. In this shot, the buildings are going to be blurred anyway to keep the focus on the character, so there was no point in putting in extra effort on details that would disappear later in compositing. For this shot, Sukuna's inside a wrecked building, so I drew a rough room with a ceiling and a small window to set the vibe. I actually took some inspiration from Alan Bowe's work to figure out what exactly to create. Then I painted everything with the bucket tool, and later I'll add cracks in compositing so it feels like he really crashed there. This was actually my first time making a background like this, so for now, I think it just looks fine. Cut 12 was pretty similar, so I didn't need to repeat the whole process again. The only real change was adding a cracked hole in the building, just like in the manga. Simple tweak, but it got the job done. Alright, background's done, and honestly, that stage already drained me. But now it was time for compositing, and this is where everything either comes alive or completely falls apart. If I mess this part up, no amount of animation can save it. So yeah, I had to lock in. Cut 1. Gojo regenerating his hand. This needed some heavy overlays. I layered 2 cursed energy textures, blended them together, then threw in smoke and wind so the flow felt natural. When he punches Sukuna, I dropped in a circular smoke burst to really sell that impact. The hardest shot? Sukuna crashing into the buildings. This one ate so much time. I stacked smoke, used a dodge filter on overlays to make the buildings shine, and suddenly, the whole thing just popped. Then came Gojo's red. I piled up overlays, synced them perfectly with his hand using keyframes, and boom, cursed energy unlocked. The next cut was similar, just added speed lines and a small hand explosion to push it further. For Sukuna and Mahoraga's reaction, I lined up the characters with the background and used Alight Motion's 3D camera. And man, that shot turned out insanely cool. And then the final scene, hollow purple. I grabbed overlays from Pinterest, tweaked them into this flowing cursed energy, blasted it with purple color grading, and finished with a shine effect on the eyes. The whole vibe felt intense, like the attack was about to blow everything away. As for the other cuts, nothing too crazy. I just slapped on a bunch of smoke overlays to match the manga vibe, and honestly, that got the job done. Now it was time to bring the animation to life with audio. I hit up Epidemic Sound, spent hours searching, testing sound after sound. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. That was the grind. Once I had the right sounds, I dropped them into Capcut and started layering. Every movement, every scene needed the perfect hit. Slowly, the clips started to feel alive. But it wasn't just about adding sounds. I had to balance everything so nothing felt too loud or messy. The OST had to lift the scene, not drown it out. And then came the final hunt, the perfect OST. That part felt endless, but when I finally found it and synced it up, everything just clicked. Honestly, I'm proud of the sound design. All the sound effects I added took a lot of work, but they're what really made the animation come alive. Then after that, I brought everything into Alight Motion for those intense shakes and subtle camera moves, just to really bring the building crashes to life. And for the last touch, I went back into CapCut for color correction, adding different filters to lock in the vibe. That's where the whole project finally came to an end. Looking back, this project was full of firsts for me. I tried so many new things, making my own backgrounds, pushing Alight Motion in ways I'd barely used before. And honestly, that's probably why the whole thing ended up taking me around a month and a half. On top of that, I even had to take a week off because I got sick, which delayed things further. But even with all that, reaching the end gave me such heavy motivation. It showed me I can actually pull off something like this, and it makes me want to push even harder on future videos. I know this animation still isn't perfect. There's always room to improve, but for the learning experience, I gave it everything I had. So now it's your turn. Drop a comment and let me know which manga panel I should bring to life next. And with that, here's the final result.
Even after 1,000 years, the King of Curses feels fear.
Face, Paramita, Pillar of Light. Maharaga! Crow in Declaration. Hollow.